Constructing your life is about much more than just building a bank account. Each week, join real estate entrepreneur and mindset coach Austin Linney as he interviews guests who are constructing their dream lives and impacting the world around them on a daily basis. If you're an entrepreneur or wanting to start a business, or you just want to hear motivating stories of how others have overcome the odds, you are in the right place. And now for your host, Austin Linney.
Guys, welcome back to Construct Your Life. This is Austin Linney here. I have the pleasure of having Miss Alice in the house. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm doing good. So we got connected through Mandy, who is amazing. I don't have enough words to say about how great she is. So, but what I like to do with my guests is let them tell their story and where they want to start, and we kind of go from there.
All right. So I'll give you the longest version you want. So back in early 2000s, we had, early-ish, mid-2000s, had bought a condo in Connecticut. And we had, after a few years, had decided my husband would start into real estate. He was at a sales job prior and just figured there was a ceiling there and he wasn't going to, keep having these mandatory hours and not make money. And went into real estate. We knew that we would have a reduction in income because that's just how real estate works. It takes a while to kind of get rolling. Made that active decision knowing that it was kind of a long-term future decision for financial reasons later, not really knowing the financial impact at the time. So while we had, I was kind of a saver, but together we hadn't really been saving. So we ended up losing our condo. We tried deed in lieu. We tried renting it. The bank, unfortunately, was not having it. You can't really talk to them about any of that until you miss payments, which is really unfortunate because that's, if you're missing payments, you've already kind of expended all of your, credit card lines, like whatever you could to do that. So we ended up getting foreclosed on. So I was coming home to like things rubber banded to the doorknob. Like it was a really rough time. Most people had no idea what we were kind of dealing with. And when we moved out prior to the bank actually having the auction at the property, what was really unfortunate about that was what they ended up getting for the property later was really what we had gotten as an offer to try to short sale it in the first place. So they had to pay condo fees and all that stuff on top. Very worst part is my husband's been in real estate now for 11 years and I've been over full-time for 5. And we actually got sued for the deficiency. So we got sued for $68,000 from the bank. I've never heard of it happening and neither has he. So that was very unfortunate, but that was a huge lesson for us, right? Like we had other expenses go up, but, didn't have the money to pay for those things and didn't have the savings. So it's kind of one of those things where you hit that rock bottom and realize like, I'm never coming back here. So we fortunately kept paying everything else that we could. So we paid the cars off shortly after, had one credit card that we had to settle with that's really where we're drawing the money to keep paying the mortgage while we were doing that. So then we moved out, we rented for a while, saved up, and we were able to buy our first investment property in probably 3 or 4 years after. I think you need at least 3 or 4 years after foreclosure to buy an owner occupied property. So even though it was an investment property, we house taxed and moved into it. And then purposely had purchased under one person's name so that we could do that again. So we, in the meantime, moved into our studio after living in a 3-bed. We had our toddler, he was little at the time, and 2 of our pets moved into like 450 square foot studio. For a few months, that was terrible, right before COVID. So thankfully we were out before COVID, and bought 3 threes across the street. So then I house taxed that one under my name, moved into there for a while. And now we are, we've been debt free for a long time and happy to stay here. And now we finally bought a single family. So having like an attached 2-car garage or a window over the kitchen sink or your own deck, things we never had while we were renting and house hacking. I mean, you have a yard, but it's not the same thing. So yeah, that's kind of our short backstory. I'll give questions.
So what, now there's a lot there. What made you crazy enough after going through all you went through to go after it again?
So it was actually the multis were less scary for at least for me personally, because I felt like it's an investment, right? So if someone's paying your rent, even though we were renovating and doing stuff, it's less to carry than a personal property. I had actually had kind of a, not a meltdown, but a little bit of a freak out buying our single family that we just bought, because we haven't lived in anything solo that wasn't a rental since that happened. So I was like, oh my God, like no one's paying for this. And then I did the math and I'm like, oh no, like we might be fine. But it was really scary buying this house that we've only been in now for like 3.5 months. It was scary for my brain to be like, these are costs that we fully have to shoulder now. There's no rental income to offset this here. I mean, we have rental income, but not in this property.
What do you think? I mean, there was sacrifices in there. There was a lot of hardship. There's a lot of stress. What do you think the lessons that you learned, just house hacking and dealing with all that you'll take for you? And I'm sure you help other investors out with moving forward.
So a huge piece, I think, for me is if you had told me before it happened or even like while some of it was happening, like what I'd have to deal with and who I'd have to tell this to or and it was years enough now that most of it doesn't, every now and then I have a little break, but most of it doesn't affect me super emotionally anymore. But if you had told me at the end, like you're going to have to deal with court, you're going to get sued, you're going to have to deal with other accounts getting closed, XYZ, I would have been like, lock me up, put me in a padded room. Like I'm done. Like, I'm just not going to do that. I'm not going to deal with that. And so I think there's a lot in there for tenacity that you don't know really what you can handle until you have to handle it. And I think that's been like a major life lesson of like, you just don't know until you go through it. And now I look back and I'm like, wow, that really, really sucked. But like, we're good. Like we're still here. We're stronger than ever, like, financially stronger than ever. So I think that's a big, big lesson. Investing in house hacking is really, it's not for everyone. So my advice on that or would be, I wouldn't buy a single family first and then try to house hack because you're never going to want to leave your house. You're not going to want to go live in your multi. But if you can do it, it's a great way for like low down payment. You come up with 3.5 instead of 20, 25%, 30% down. And on some of these big properties, that's a lot. That's a big, big difference in money. I mean, frankly, even on $100,000, 25% is a lot more than 3%. So it's a big chunk of money that you're saving on doing that. So if you're able to house hack and, sacrifice a bit, we had just found the reason we moved into the studio is we found these great. So we had just filled our last unit it was in a 4, and we filled our last unit with a family. And literally, I think the next year or 2 days later, these 3 girls who were, I think they just re-upped for like the 3rd or 4th year, and they're like PhD students, like we're between 2 of the hospitals. I think some of them are kind of residents at the hospital. And they were amazing. And he's like, oh my God, we just signed these leases. And I'm like, he's like, do you want them to move into our unit? And I was like, are you kidding? Like, tell me you're kidding. And he's like, okay, like short period of time, like we'll move into the studio because we hadn't decided what we wanted to do with that yet. So we gave up our unit for the purpose of having these amazing tenants. And I'm glad that we did because they've been, amazing. They only called me once when water came in through something, but so we gave it up for that. I just had given my husband an ultimatum sort of that we moved in like, I think August. And I was like, my son and my birthday are in November. And I said, we can't live here by our birthdays. Okay. Like figure it out. Like I'll give you that time, but like, that's it. And at that point, I think we had gotten an offer. We were kind of talking to the guy who owned the 3 threes. But that was kind of my ultimatum. And I think we did move out mid-October. So it was almost 3 months, I think, that we were there. But
so nice. See if this resonates with you. And me and my ex-wife has since divorced, but something I learned through, because we tore down the garage and lived in that for 3 years while that was an Airbnb and owned the house across the street. There's something that I learned. It took me a long time to learn it. And I think you probably went through the same thing with your husband. There is sacrifice, and then there's the way you feel, right? I'm all about sacrificing, keeping your bills low. But if I could go back and do it again, not that it would change that relationship, but I sacrificed too much and the way I felt, right? The way that we felt, having space, open space, and understanding that sometimes you can be, I was taking every Airbnb booking, everything, just working to the bone and realizing that I was destroying myself and how I felt and kind of the way we felt. And like, there's kind of that, it's a double-edged sword when you're trying to scale up real estate but if you feel better, right, and everybody's happy, I think you're probably going to do better. Don't you agree? I
do agree. I think for us, because we had been through, I feel like probably the worst of how we felt when we got everything, I don't want to say got taken, like we made decisions like this didn't just happen to me, right? Like I saw it coming a mile away. Whether I thought I knew everything about it or not is a different story, and how I felt about it. But so I don't want sympathy from anyone, right? Like, we made choices that this is because of the choices we made, not because I suddenly was like homeless I wasn't homeless, but I'm trying to get back to so I think when we felt the worst there, when we moved into, we were renting a 1-bed when we had our baby. So we knew that like his bassinet was like in my makeshift dining room that didn't really exist. And so we knew from probably the worst of it that wasn't the worst of it. So I think for us, we had a gauge for like what rock bottom, like that kind of loosely, what that felt like. So the 1-bed didn't feel that bad. Eventually we're like, okay, we can't keep doing this. Like, we have a baby, he's getting bigger. And they're up until they're probably 5 or 6, they don't care that much. Like, they don't really know better. They're not going to all their friends' houses when they're 3 and be like, oh shoot, look how big their yard is. Like, they don't care. And so people who try to tell me that, it's BS. Like, I don't believe you. Like, your kid doesn't know differently if that's what they've got. I agree that maybe if 13, 14, 15-year-olds are like, wow, I have a different house than my friends, like, I'm not living the same way, that's when they'll notice it. But little they're stronger than we are with a lot of that stuff. And so we had seen the worst of it, so that didn't feel so bad. And then moving from the 1-bed to our 3-bed unit didn't feel so bad, because like, we've got more space now, not as big as we had in a condo years ago, but we had way more, like 2 extra bedrooms worth. Like, holy crap, like that's huge with a baby. The studio, I think, would have been rougher had it run into COVID, number one, where we would have really been locked down or been in the house, all of us, for long periods of time. It was actually really cool for a while, and I think our kid thought we were like in a hotel. It was weird the first few nights though, because the kid gets up to like watch a movie, like it's 6 a.m. or whatever. And I remember him watching like Clash of the Titans, and I'm laying in bed and I'm like in a hotel, like I can see the TV and I'm in bed, and he's like over here yelling about the crabs or whatever, the scorpions in the movie. And I just remember being like, oh my God, like this could be so much worse though, right? Like, it's a nice unit. We had just renovated it. It's an Airbnb now. But so I think for us, it was a little bit different because we had the gauge for like kind of the worst cases, like crying on your stairs because you've got stuff on your doorknob again, and like the bank threatening you with XYZ or not listening with you XYZ, or that kind of stuff. I think for us gave us a gauge for like to be grateful sometimes, whether it was the 1-bed or the 3-bed. And I think maybe that's why I gave him a timeline on the studio, maybe knowing subconsciously in advance like where my breaking point would be. Like, if it was Christmas and we were still there, I was probably going to lose it. So I think so, a little bit different for us, but I hear you. It's definitely hard, even just in running a business, right? Like making choices that can be really, really hard, and they can be really, really hard for other people not understanding you as a business owner, and losing, whether it's employees or coworkers or friends over decisions that because you're a business owner. And it's a fine line though between stuff that hurts and knowing that it's good for you.
Exactly. What advice would you have to any new investor or anybody looking to get started from your experiences?
Probably the basics, like, right, save. Don't make stupid decisions. Make sure the numbers work. Don't overpay for something if the rental income's not there. If you buy a house, like under market rents, I see that stuff all the time in real estate, right? Under market rents. Well, why? Like, why are you under market rent? Like, why don't you as an owner right now, as a seller, make your rents better? Some of those things can be red flags. Some of them are just owners who age out who don't care. But so save, make sure the numbers work. If you can house hack, and you can finagle that, I would recommend trying to do that. Like, it's definitely worthwhile. You just have to, I won't use the word sacrifice because we're kind of tying that with pain a little bit here, but if you can do that kind of stuff, I'd recommend it because you're saving a boatload of cash, right? Like, not putting in that down payment and stuff. So, and the earlier the better, right? Because the first one seems really, really scary, and then you're like, oh shoot, why didn't we do that sooner? I couldn't do that sooner, right? Because there was that black mark on my stuff. But for other people, like, if you could do it sooner, like, hell, dude, 22 years old, do your job, go ahead.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, right, is I have a friend, he's 23. I think they own 800 units, and he started when he was 17, right?
Oh my God, that's
awesome. He was just, like I tell everybody, he's just dumb enough not to understand what he was doing. And then when he woke up, he goes, oh my God, this is easier than I thought. And then, you just start snowballing. He's got a partner who's a little older, but there is something to be said to understanding the mechanisms of real estate investing. And once you understand the basic concepts, the decisions become a lot more business oriented instead of emotion oriented.
Yes. Because I think buyers for like single family condo, like just personal properties, are very emotional. It's an emotional decision. How do they feel when they're in their kitchen? Where can they have their friends over? And you're looking at the multi and you're like, I just look at them now and I'm like, it's too much money. They don't make enough in rent.
Yeah.
Like insurance is going to be too much. Oh, I'm going to have to replace the roof in 5 years. You're just looking at it as a strict investment. It's very much black and white, kind of how sellers look at selling a lot. I would say not all the time, but how sellers look at selling. I just want my money. I want the most for the house. I don't want to deal with BS and terrible buyers. And it's the same thing when you're kind of buying investments and thinking, can I make money on this? Can I, not as a greedy landlord, because I see that stuff on social media all the time. It drives me nuts. But, like, does it make sense? And that's it's a much easier decision, right? Buying our single family house is a different feeling than that. I mean, I think for us, because we're so in that frame of mind, even with helping other investors, even looking at our house was like, okay, well, cost versus what can we sell it for if we don't want to live here in 10 years, but it was still there's a little bit of emotion involved, but I think everything we look at now is much more black and white, like data driven, number driven.
There's a guy down in Florida, him and his wife, Bobby Castro, who owns many, 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 many properties. And he has not gone in a property in 4 years because he's too emotional. And so he'll only look at a property on paper because he doesn't want to get emotional. And they just buy multifamilies like it's water because he's just looking at the basic mechanisms, the numbers of the property, and not saying, well, this is this and this is that, right? Mm-hmm. I think that's when I heard that, I was like, oh, it's super interesting, because I get that way with Airbnbs. It's like, well, no, that's a different story. Airbnb is an emotion. It's somebody, right. But ultimately it's also, does this property make sense? Because if you're buying it on emotion for Airbnb, they could change the laws, right? So I tell everybody, does this property work long-term? If you script it back to zero, would this still operate the way that it needs to operate? And everybody's, trying to buy on appreciation and all these things. And like appreciation should be the icing on the cake, not the other way around.
Right, not how you're doing it. Yeah.
Yeah. And in this market, this guy in Utah, I heard the other day, they bought their house like 5 years ago. It went up $600,000. I'm like, don't listen to that story.
Yeah, don't.
Don't listen to that story. So what is the focus for you and your husband as you move forward? Are you looking to scale up to larger multifamily units, or we're just still taking down the multifamily, the small multifamily?
So for our investing, I think we'd like to head into either like mixed use or towards commercial, knowing that things like triple net and things, you're not dealing with some of the maintenance, you're not dealing with some of the things that you deal with on a multi, when like someone's calling you because like the smoke's going off in the hallway. That's a real story that happened this weekend. So not dealing with that anymore and dealing with more commercial properties. We looked at one, most of our stuff's in the city near here where we were living, and now we live kind of 20, 30 minutes outside. So not terribly far, but enough out of the way. And there was an opportunity that came around the corner. The guy trying to sell his multi actually back in the city. And it's like, oh, I've got this liquor store, but there's a 2 upstairs. And we're like, that'd be an interesting segue into commercial without going straight into commercial, without having a flipping clue what we're doing. So, I use that loosely because my husband's now sort of headed into commercial with our business. So he's got some commercial buyers and some of our listings and stuff like that. So, but it would be an interesting segue, right? There's still the 2 units that we know what that looks like. We know what the leases are. We know how to manage those people, and then, have the commercial space downstairs. So that could be kind of an interesting way. So I think that's kind of where we'll head, into mixed use or commercial. I think we're kind of done with the 3s and 4s for the moment. If a great opportunity came up with a condo or something like that, then we'd probably consider that. Because we do have one of those that, they're holding, and we have another partner, they've flipped and stuff like that. So there's a few condo buildings in the city that we're really, really familiar with who, we'd consider holding or flipping some of those if we found them at auction, or, you're not going to find them on the cheap on market. So.
Do you think that every investor needs to walk through the process of the different asset classes to kind of like commercial, industrial, triple net? This is a totally different beast, different mechanisms, different brokers. But I ultimately think I did I did multiple single family rentals, and I'm like, I don't like this. This doesn't work for me. And now we're in a different space where construction or, large, RV parks. So I'm I'm curious, do you think that it's part of the process to do that? Or do you think that somebody can say, this doesn't really work for my personality, I'm going to go over here and do this?
I do. I think there's a lot of people in the industrial commercial space who head straight that way, right? It's a bigger down payment, more money. So I think for us, it didn't make sense to head that way. One, we didn't know as much about it. So when he came into real estate, it was like learning how to invest. So it was condos, it was flips, it was stuff like that first. Then it was like, makes more sense to, you can make a little bit when you flip it, but like, let's just go for something long-term. So then cash flow is the game. And then it sort of just, for us, it progressed that way because that's where we could start. I couldn't come up with a 25% down payment on $1 million building. Like day one, when I was getting foreclosed on, that wasn't even an option. Not to mention just not knowing about it. But I think there are people who, like, if you've got money and no time, like, just find someone to give your money to and get them investing it for you. You don't have to know what they're doing. You know what I mean? You know what they're doing with it, but not like know the intricacies of dealing with it. So for us, it made sense. For some people, it's not going to make sense because doing a small flip and making 20, 30 grand or, cash flowing stuff every year, or planning to hold it for 30 years and then sell it while you're cash flowing the whole time, things like that won't make sense for those people. They just want to, spend 250 and keep $1 million and not deal with the building. And that makes more sense for them. So I think it is probably scenario specific for people and what makes sense and where they are with especially their finances and what they know about and who they know. Because commercial is kind of something he's learning now, but we didn't know about it. So I don't know that I would have actively been ready to do this even like a year ago, thinking about buying something even mixed use. And now it's like, okay, that's probably not so bad. But I think it's your gauge for what you know and who you know and probably your financial position.
One of the things when we talked the first time that I thought was super inspiring is I think a lot of people, maybe they're in a situation where they know what they need to do, or they're in a scenario where they're not in a place, but they're not looking at it. They're not owning what happened. And one of the things that I appreciate about you is that, I'm not saying it happened overnight, but you owned it, and now it's part of your story. It's not who you are, but it is part of the story. And what advice would you give to somebody when they're going through something like that, or they know they need to go through something like that to kind of free themselves?
Like being a butterfly, to go through the cocoon and go to sleep for a while. It's really, you have to own like what you did, right? Like you don't get foreclosed on because you didn't do anything. You don't lose your house because you didn't do anything. You don't lose a business because you didn't do anything. And it is a hard look, whether it's, hey, I had really bad customer service and I don't have any repeat customers, or, we have half the income and twice as many expenses now. Things like that don't happen overnight. And I think looking at it for a long time, and there's a lot of negativity around it in the world. People are like, oh, you got foreclosed on, oh, you lost your house. There's a huge stigma to that. And I wish there wasn't. And I don't mean that for sympathy wise. I just wish you could talk about it more. And when we were going through it, we didn't talk about it to anyone. I just remember crying on the floor one day with my best friend who had no idea that any of it was happening. And the silver lining that is we ended up opening a nonprofit or creating a nonprofit in our city. So we help typically, I don't want to say underprivileged, although that comes up a lot for us, but there's families doing similar to what we were, whether they got slammed with medical bills or something like that. And now they're just not going to have Thanksgiving, or they can't have their kids have Christmas. Like there's things like that I think people don't see. And if you're not, probably especially with COVID, if you're not seeing your family a lot, you don't know that they're dealing with this. And so we help those people. We've brought, full turkeys and pans and meals to these people for the holidays, and it's anonymous, right? Like someone says, hey, so-and-so, I go to church with them. I know that they're having a hard time. Like he just lost his job. They're not on any kind of assistance and they're not going to talk about it, but it's the way that you hear people say things and you can see that with them. So that's what we decided to do. So we have a 501c3 for that. And at the time I kind of wish there was something like that for us, because we'd go over to our in-laws and have dinner once a week as like hey, we're trying to spend time with you. And really, I'm like, I'd like to have dinner. So that's something really good that came out of it, that I don't think we would have been as passionate or wanting to do that for other people if we hadn't been in that same place, wishing someone could talk about it. And I wish more people talked about it. So in our space, when we help people with short sales and stuff, they're like, oh my God, like no one knows I don't have enough to pay off my house, or I'm selling. And like, we can actually come from a place of real empathy. Like I have been there. I know how you feel right now. I know what you're going through, not just hey, I'm going to take my commission and like, we'll talk to the bank and hope all goes well. And that's fine too. But for us, I can actually sit there with someone who's breaking down their living room and tell them like I know where you are right now.
Yeah.
So it's different.
You've turned your story into your message, and you've turned into impacting others, which in turn is going to make them not, look at their story a certain way, and it's going to create the space for them to move from it, and so on and so on. And you're 100% correct. It's not talked about enough. And it's, look, at the end of the day, you took a risk because you didn't want to live a mediocre life, and you got caught or something happened. You fixed it. And now because of those same risk, you're now financially free. So, I mean, who can fault you for that? Right. And so I think people look at the source of it instead of look over here, though. Look what happened and look at the impact that we're having on so many people.
And I think something for me that came out of it too, I remember being at the company I worked at for almost a decade before I came over. And I was talking to someone one day, and I thought, everything I knew what I was going through, but it's hard sometimes when you're going through real bad things to see other people going through bad things, even though you'd think your gauge would be higher for seeing that. It's not, or I felt like it wasn't for me. And talking to him one day, and he's like, yeah, my grandkids are at the house. Like, they stay with me now. My daughter's going through X, Y, Z. And I'm sitting there being like, you seem so like everything's fine. Like, you're happy at work. Like, everything's great. You're easygoing. Like, you'd never know that he was, had 9 people living in his house because his daughter was having a really hard time. And like, someone's gone and someone's really sick and he's in a rehab, and like, oh my God. For me, it gave me this gauge of like, everyone has their own stuff going on, and everyone's been through something, even if they don't talk about it. And especially if they don't talk about it, I feel like it's probably something else they're dealing with, or childhood trauma or adult trauma, or both, or something financially going on right then, or someone being worried they're going to lose their job. Like, everyone's got something. And I think part of it is what you do in spite of it, and part of it's what you do because of it. And I feel like there's times in my life where I'm like, I'm doing this in spite of all this crap. Like, I don't want to ever be there again. And then there's other stuff you're like, I'm going to keep going because of this, or because I want to tell my story, because I want other people to benefit from the things I've learned, maybe not go through the things that I went through. So that for me was huge. We're just realizing like, everyone has their own stuff. It's just how they're dealing with it, or how they're talking about it, or not.
So true. If people want to follow your journey, they want to see what you got going on, how would they do that?
I have a personal Facebook page. I have a business Facebook page for the Jarboe Group. It's our real estate business. We have a Facebook page for our nonprofit, so the JarboeFoundation.org. I have an Instagram for personal, and I have an Instagram for our business. And then, I have email, any way that you come through, whether you come through my business website or the nonprofit website, or email directly, all those kind of things. I'm going to see about 99% of them personally. They're like, I am the person that's catching all that stuff. So really any way that people could get in touch is the easiest way. It doesn't really matter how.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you so much for being open to helping others. And guys, if you got some value from that, send this to a friend that you think could get some value from it, and share it with somebody. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Construct Your Life with Austin Linney. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and pay it forward by sharing with a friend. Most importantly, take this opportunity to start constructing your life by taking immediate action on what you learned. For show notes, resources, and more information on one-on-one coaching with Austin, visit constructyourlifepodcast.com.